welcome to our Wheel and Anchor webinar on Tastes of Eastern France. So just one more time and instructions for anyone who has just joined us. In order to communicate with myself, with me and the team during our webinar, you just scroll down to the bottom of the screen, click on the button marked chat, and that will that's how you can ask any questions, pose any questions that you might have throughout our webinar as we move forward. So without further ado, let's get started and talk a little bit about our program, Tastes of Eastern France. So just for those of you who are perhaps have not participated in our webinars before, I always like to share what our vision for Wheel and Anchor is, which is really about bringing travelers together. This is really something I'm passionate about. It was part of the whole rationale for starting Wheel and Anchor in the first place is that I've traveled with a number of people over the past few years who've really gotten to become friends because they share a like-minded view of travel. And you can see here in the picture, this is a group that was with us in the Caucasus region last year, and made me very happy that there's a still ongoing dialogue on Facebook, on WhatsApp, folks still talking to one another. And this is part of what I like to facilitate is getting people together. And on that same note, what our vision is for our travelers is about being well-traveled and well-connected. Here, a more recent photo where you can see a bunch of our Wheel and Anchor members dressed in yakutas in Japan. And we sat down. It all looks like we're in nightgowns. But this was part of the experience of Japan, and part of about what being well-traveled is all about is embracing some of the local traditions and cultures. In this case, it was donning this dress for a fabulous dinner that we had. And again, becoming connected to, getting to know other people who have a like-minded view of travel. That's what we're all about here at Wheel and Anchor, and that's my goal. That our members develop relationships, friendships with other people they travel with, and it's been a great success so far. I think a lot of new friendships arising out of our recent trip to Japan and South Korea. So let's get into now the program itself and what's in store for France in October of next year. The team today is obviously myself, founder of Wheel and Anchor, my colleague Joel, and our technical support person. So he's in the background making sure everything goes smoothly. And of course, Cassandra McKinnon, many of you will have spoken with before, our senior member services specialist, who is the one who answers all your questions and gets you booked on the trips that you'd like to go on. Okay, and the plan for today is to help you understand a little bit about the culture and cuisine of Eastern France. As I mentioned at the beginning, we had a lot of inquiries. People wanted to go to some of the classic destinations. That's why we put France on the program, in addition to our Italy tour that we're also going to be running in September of next year. And I look forward to being your guide along the way to help you understand both in planning a trip like this, or in, of course, I'll be hosting the tour as well to show you a little bit, share with you my own experiences of this part of the country, which I thoroughly enjoy. There's so much to see here, and that's why we will be doing this little inquiry about Eastern France that we're going to be visiting in October of 2020. So now looking at the region, we're going to be focusing on the Rhone River Valley, or actually the Rhone and the Saône River. The Saône is a tributary of the Rhone, both of which originate in the Alps in Switzerland, on the border between Switzerland and France, and flow out. The Rhone flows out into the Mediterranean in the south. So needless to say, we're passing through Burgundy and, of course, the Rhone Valley, Côte du Rhône, some of the most famous wine regions, not just in France, but frankly, the whole world. And the program is divided into 3 parts. And this was very popular on our Egypt program as well. And a lot of people said, wow, they really like the fact that you could choose what parts that you wanted to participate in. The first part of the program will be a Rhone River cruise itself, beginning in Lyon and going down to Arles in the south in the Rhone River Delta before returning to Lyon. The second part will be you can do a gastronomic adventure in the city of Lyon itself, which you can do, say, just the river cruise or the river cruise with the 3-night extension in Lyon. And then the final part will be where we'll explore in a little bit more depth Burgundy and Champagne. And so you can do all 3 parts, or you can do just part A, B, or you can do just part B and C, or just part C. So this is the beauty of this program, is that depending on the amount of time and budget and your interest level, there's different ways to enjoy this part of Eastern France. So let's get now into the day-by-day itinerary. We're going to be heading out of Canada on September the 30th, of course, taking our overnight flight, which, depending on where you're coming from, you may connect in either a gateway city in Europe, or actually they have direct flights between Montreal and Lyon. So it could be that you might choose to fly from your home city to Montreal first and then connect directly to Montreal. So depending on what your own wish is, and I'll explain about the flights later on, we don't have a set a bunch of flights on these that everybody needs to book into, just because it was, I think, a lot more beneficial to be able to choose your own flight routing. So we'll arrive then in Lyon on day 2, which will be October the 1st, and we'll embark right onto our ship. Now, Lyon is interesting because I think a lot of people don't know a lot about Lyon, and it's one of my favorite cities in France. I actually, not that I don't like Paris, of course everybody likes Paris, but I love Lyon, partly because it is such a gastronomic center, but also because it has a different vibe to it. You know, it's like comparing Los Angeles to New York. It's perhaps not a good comparison, but people are a little bit more laid back, a little bit more present to life, as opposed to Paris, which is a very business city. And that's why we've designed the tour so that we have several touch points in Lyon, which is, of course, the 3rd largest city in France. And we're going to start right off with the river cruise. So upon arrival, we're going to head straight to the port, to the pier on the Rhone River, and embark on this wonderful ship, the Amadeus Provence, which will be our home for the first 7 nights of the program. And the Amadeus Provence is part of a company. It's actually a family-owned Austrian company that owns this and a fleet of other ships. I've worked with them for a number of years. And what I really, really like about them is that there's a big focus on hospitality. And this is where the Austrianness of it comes through. The ship itself is really it's as high quality an experience as any of the top river cruises in Europe. The company itself is a little bit lesser known, but we've had great experiences with them, and they deliver a great value for the price. As I say, the ship is wonderful. She's new. She was only built in 2017 and has all the amenities that one would expect from a high-class river cruise ship. 140 guests, so in 70 cabins that are split between 3 decks. Of course, all of your meals, buffet, breakfast, lunch, dinner. They have even a late-night snack that they serve on board. They include wine, red and white wine, with the dinners. They've got bicycles on board, so if one wants to do their own thing in some of the ports along the way. And we do have some good free time on this trip, which is what I like. It's not packed full of one shore excursion to the next. They've even got an infinity pool now. October might be a bit cool for swimming, but nevertheless, it's there. And frankly, I think it's kind of cool to swim, and you can look right off the back of the ship as you're cruising down the Rhone Valley. Of course, cabins are important, staterooms, and I find them lovely on this ship. They are a good size. The cabins on the so-called hidden deck are about 172 square feet and have windows that are at the sort of the top part of the room. So they're a little bit better than the portholes you'll find on many river cruise ships. And the cabins on the Strauss and Mozart decks are as pictured here. They're a little bit larger at about 188 square feet, which is quite generous as far as river cruise ships go. And of course, an amply sized washroom. My test is always, can you pick up the bar of soap in the shower without having to bend over? I know it sounds a little corny, but you'd be surprised how many ships, particularly the older ones that are a little bit tight. So it's nice to have a bathroom that's amply sized. So very, very comfy. They've even got a few suites on board the ship as well. If you really want that extra space, at 284 square feet, they've got an even larger bathroom as well as a little sitting area and a balcony. So for those who like to have the added space, we have suites available as well on the Amadeus Provence. And that's going to be our home for the next 7 nights. So we'll have a wonderful welcome dinner on board. And then our first full day, we're going to sail north, first of all, on the Saône River. And as I mentioned, the Saône is a tributary of the Rhone, and we'll arrive into Mâcon. And in Mâcon, we have actually a couple of tours that are organized for this day. In the morning, we're going to visit this Cluny Abbey, or the ruins of the Abbey. And it is an incredible historic site because it used to be the largest building in Christianity until, of course, they built St. Peter's in Rome. And so the history here in Mâcon is really quite amazing. So we'll spend the morning with a focus on the Abbey, but seeing other parts of the town itself. In the afternoon, then we'll come back to the ship for lunch. In the afternoon, we head to visit the Beaujolais region. Of course, all of us are familiar with Beaujolais Nouveau that gets released every year in the early fall. It's some of the first wines that are harvested, and we'll visit the appellation of Georges de Boeuf. And so for those of you that are a little bit more familiar with Burgundy wines, Georges de Boeuf is one of the most famous négociants. So he's a gentleman who basically puts together grapes from all different vineyards across the region and bottles them under various labels. So we'll get to see the facilities of Georges de Boeuf when we're here in Mâcon. We'll continue on the next day, and we're still north of Lyon on the Saône River here at Chalon-sur-Saône. And here we get to visit the more notable wine labels, the premium ones like Pommard, like Mousseau. We'll do a side trip here to Beaune. Beaune is kind of loosely considered the capital of Burgundy, and we'll have a chance to visit the Hospice de Beaune. Beaune itself was actually a hospice back in the 15th century when the city was originally founded. And so it's a neat town to visit, to walk around. For those who participate in the latter part of our trip, we're going to have another opportunity to visit Beaune with a little bit more time. But here we'll at least get a chance to see some of the major highlights of Beaune, as well as touring one of the notable wine cellars that are in the region. From here, we come back to Lyon itself, and Lyon is at the confluence of the Saône and Rhone rivers. So we'll have a chance here. It'll be our first real chance because when we arrive, we don't really get much time to see Lyon, depending on what time our flight arrives. Here, we'll have a good half day where we will tour some of the pedestrian areas in the center of Lyon. And again, I think Lyon is an amazing city. And that's part of the reason why if one does just the river cruise, you get a taste, pardon the pun, taste of Eastern France, but you get a taste of Lyon, but you really don't get the vibe of the city. And that's why I've put on this gastronomic adventure at the end of the tour. So while we pass through Lyon, we'll see the major highlights, the main cathedral. We'll see a little bit of Pardieu, the old part of Lyon, and at least get a bit of a sense of it on the tour that we have in Lyon. We'll then head off in the afternoon. We have a little bit of a longer sail as we head down to Avignon. And Avignon is an absolutely beautiful city, known as the city of the popes. And it was the actual base of Christianity until they decided to pick up and moved back to Rome, again, back several hundred years ago. We'll do a walking tour that takes in the highlights, which of course, the Papal Palace is the number one thing to see there. But we're going to leave the afternoon at leisure. And so here's the thing, when there are a whole host of shore excursions that are available on this program, but I've elected not to include all of them because the feedback I've gotten about river cruises in the past is that people find it just too hectic and they don't have a chance to experience these towns. And Avignon is really one of these towns that you just need to wander around, find a little cafe, and just explore all the little alleys and places that are in this city. It's truly an amazing place. For those that are super keen, there is an optional shore excursion that we didn't put in the program to a 2,000-year-old aqueduct called Pont du Gard. You have to drive about an hour outside the city, but personally, I think it's best just to wander around in Avignon. And if you know anybody that's been there before, you'll certainly have heard them rave about what a great city it is. From Avignon, we continue our cruise further south, and we then hit Arles. And Arles is in the same vein as Avignon, is all about the papal history, the Christian history. Arles is known because Van Gogh, the Dutch impressionist, spent so much time here, and so a lot of his works, a lot of his paintings are from various parts of Arles. And of course, other artists came and followed in his footsteps down there. So we'll have a good chance to walk around on our own in the morning. Again, we're going to do this at leisure. I'll certainly be there to point out a few of the key sites. But while we're in Arles in the afternoon, we will take a tour out to see the Camargue. And the Camargue is a region that was turned into a national park by France a few decades ago. And the Camargue is like its own little biosphere. I didn't put a picture in it here, but you can picture wild horses and bulls running around. It's hard to believe that you are in Provence. Arles is actually in the region of Provence, where you'll find Marseille and Nice and Monte Carlo and all places like that. But when you're in the Camargue, you'd think you were out in the middle of North Dakota or something like that. It's a very wild and quite an amazing region. So it'll be, we'll spend a good 3 or 4 hours touring around Camargue to get a sense of this area, which, as I say, it's like its own little biosphere. Arles is the point where we turn around because the Rhone actually turns into the Delta and then empties into the Mediterranean. So we cannot travel further south by river cruise ship. So we then start to head back north, and we'll stop in at Châteauneuf-du-Rhône. And Châteauneuf-du-Rhône is not Châteauneuf-du-Pape, although Châteauneuf-du-Pape is not far away. Many of you will be familiar with that very famous wine label. But the reason that we stop in here is because we make a side trip over to the Ardèche Gorge. And the Ardèche Gorge is, again, it's when you arrive in here and you see these 100-meter high cliffs. And at the beginning of this valley, there is an archway that's 60 meters high, like a natural bridge that goes over the gorge. And you'd think, you're shocked that you're in the middle of France and they have all of this natural beauty, all these natural wonders that one wouldn't expect. An hour's drive away from the second largest city of Marseille. And so part of this natural beauty is what I find very, very appealing about cruising in this part of France. So as we continue north, then for the Ardèche Gorge will be our last full day trip. We'll then arrive back to Lyon on the morning of October the 8th. And the river cruise portion, so part A of our trip, will come to a close. So those of you who are just interested in the river cruise, we'll bring you back to the airport and you can fly back home. But I would really encourage you to stay on for what I'm calling a gastronomic adventure in Lyon. And I had to throw this photo in here of the pommes frites, of the French fries. They are a part of French food culture as well, actually. I think they make French fries a little bit better, maybe not as good as in the Netherlands or in Belgium, but it's part of the cuisine that you'll find here. There's so much more to it. And again, this is why I've designed the program that we spend 3 nights in Lyon, because Lyon is really considered the gastronomic capital, not only of France, but actually of the whole world. And why is that? Well, there's a few different reasons why it has earned this title over not only decades, but centuries, actually. First of all, it's because the location of Lyon in relation to the surrounding regions has enabled it to get some of the finest products that you'll find. For example, cheese, the blue cheese Roquefort comes from the region of Bresse in the south part of Burgundy. That also they have these amazing free-range chickens that come out of there as well. The fish, the fresh fish that you get, like the pike that is in the famous quenelle. Quenelle is one of the famous dishes from Lyon, which you'll undoubtedly try. Comes from the Savoie, which is the region, the foothills of the Alps. The fruits and vegetables come from the Ardèche area, which is where we just were on the previous day. And of course the wine that's grown in the Rhone Valley further south, as well as in different parts of Burgundy. All of these things come together to make Lyon a place where they have a great basis for the products. Another reason, of course, that Lyon is so famous is because of this huge indoor market they have called Les Halles de Lyon. And at Les Halles, which we'll definitely visit, probably more than once, if we're really lucky, you'll be able to spot Paul Bocuse. Paul Bocuse is essentially the founder or the initiator of Nouvelle Cuisine in France. And he, as well as a number of other celebrated chefs, are based here in Lyon. And you might even, if you're lucky, you might even see him there because he goes to the markets every day, negotiates for all these wonderful products. And I mentioned Paul Bocuse because the Institut Bocuse, which is right up there with the Cordon Bleu, it's one of the famous cooking schools in the world, is based here. Not to mention a whole host of Michelin star chefs and restaurants. There are dozens of them in this city, and that's what makes Lyon really the gastronomic capital of the world. In fact, one of the highlights of the things that we're going to do during the 3 nights that we spend here is that we're including in the program a multi-course Michelin star meal. So I'm talking to a couple of restaurants about that, and we will have an experience which will perhaps be one of the finest dining experiences that you've ever had. It's just part of what you have to do in Lyon, and this is what differentiates our program from so many others, because most people don't do that. Most of the tours through this region, they have dinner in the hotel or they have dinner at some local restaurant. But no, we're going to go and experience the best of what Lyon has to offer. We're going to be staying at a wonderful little 4-star hotel that's not far from the railway station. And also it's in the 2nd district, which is sort of a peninsula of land that separates the Rhone and the Saône rivers. So we're going to have a wonderful time on our 3 nights in Lyon. And as I say, this will either form a post-tour to the cruise, if you want to do these 7 nights on the ship and then end off your trip with 3 nights in Lyon, or alternatively, it's the beginning of our exploration into the Burgundy and the Champagne regions. Or of course, it's the middle part if you decide to come with us for all 3. So after leaving Lyon, we're going to hop on the TGV train, Train Grande Vitesse, which is the high-speed train which heads out of Lyon up towards Paris, and we can jump off in Dijon. And I decided on Dijon as the place for the next few nights, not only because it's capital of the so-called Côte d'Or region, but also because it's a large enough city where there are a tremendous number of things to do, both in Dijon as well as in the immediate area. It's a town of a city of about 160,000 people. And only a few years ago, they actually designated the city center as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And between just wandering around, as I say, the parts of the city center, there are so many things in the immediate environs. And most people, again, if they even come to Dijon at all, they'll just pass through on their way from Paris to Lyon, or on their way from Paris to Geneva, or to one of the other parts of France. And yet I do believe that it warrants spending a little bit longer here. And one of the first things that we're going to do, one of our first full day trips, is head out to the Côte de Nuit. Côte de Nuit, the coast of night, if you want to translate it literally. The countryside out here is just like you would imagine the rolling hills of Burgundy to be. They, of course, have some of the most famous labels of Burgundy wines that you'll find. Chambertin, for those of you that are familiar with French wines, is perhaps one of the most common and popular labels. And they have some of the highest quality wines. So we're going to visit one of the local chateaus, and we'll gain a little bit of an understanding as to how the wines of Burgundy differentiate themselves to other wines from other parts of France, like Bordeaux. I mean, it's a completely different type of wine, and I'm a bit of a wine freak myself, as many of you will know, and I think a lot of people don't really understand. Because, Burgundy to Bordeaux is like Washington State or Oregon to California. Different climate zones, different terroir. We'll get to understand that a little bit as we spend some time up in Burgundy. As I mentioned before, we'll have a second opportunity to hit Beaune because on the ship we'll really only have about half a day. And I think Beaune, frankly, is worth spending a little bit more time at. Of course, they have a number of Burgundy wine vineyards and wine houses as well. And so for those of you that were on the river cruise portion of the trip, we'll come back and you can either, for anyone who's not participating in that, we'll have a chance to see, of course, the main sites like the Hospice, like the main cathedral. But there are so many other places of interest, like the Fontenay Abbey, which is one of the sort of historical architectural highlights of the city. But it's also a great place for those who are a bit more active. You can take a bike or an e-bike and bike around the region and see these wonderful chateaus and vineyards. There's also walking trips. So we're going to organize things for people to do in Beaune. But the nice thing, again, about how this trip is designed is that you don't have to go to Beaune at all. You might find Dijon is the place for you, or some of the other towns and villages that are easily accessible around Dijon. It's really kind of up to you. And with our help, myself, as well as my local partners in Burgundy, who are going to put together a program that kind of caters to your own interests. That'll give us one more full day in Dijon at leisure. And here, once again, if you are a museum lover, Dijon has some incredible museums. They have a modern art museum. They have an architectural museum. They have an art history museum. They have a natural, it's really amazing. The museums themselves would take you a week to visit. For those looking for a little more action, also Dijon itself has some wonderful hiking and walking trails through the rolling hills, as well as bike trips. But of course, we're here for the food. So just like is pictured here, how could you go to Dijon without visiting a place to sample some of the famous Dijon mustard? And Dijon as well has its own Les Halles, its own indoor market, where you can get a sense of the products that come from there. And undoubtedly, you have to try things like coq au vin, which comes from Dijon area. And the famous French onion soup also comes from there. So there's a lot of heritage on the culinary scene. So we'll get a chance to really sort of take a deep dive while we're in the region. From here, then, we are going to hop on the train. We're going to take a coach this time. It's easier. I love to travel by train, but to get from Dijon up to Champagne, it's much easier to go by road. And we'll head straight up to Reims. And Reims is the capital of the Champagne region. And the terrain really changes because Burgundy has got very pronounced hills, steep valleys. And as you head north into Champagne, the landscape flattens out a bit. So you have more undulating terrain, which is what gives the terroir that's necessary for producing champagnes. And you might think that all there is to do in Rhin is to taste champagne, and we're certainly going to do enough of that. But Rhin itself has such a storied and incredible history and so much amazing architecture that, again, it is worth to spend the time and really embrace what there is to see. I can't tell you how many tours that I have put together for others in the past, or even participated on myself, where it's like, oh, we're gonna, we stop in Rhin for 3 hours, and it's like 3 hours just barely gets you time to see Notre Dame. So that's why we're going to spend 4 nights here, and we're going to visit also some of the lesser known champagne houses. And this is the other thing I was going to say. Well, let me come back to that. But first of all, one of the key sites in Rhin is, of course, Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, if you look at the picture of it, you might think that looks like Notre Dame in Paris, which, of course, has sadly underwent a tragedy just over a month ago. But the one here in Rhin is about 100 years newer, and yet no less grand than the one in Paris. So for those of you who like grand churches, this is one that is not to be missed. A UNESCO World Heritage Site unto itself. It's one of the many architectural features of the city that is, I would say, the added bonus, if you will. The champagne goes without saying. Not to mention the chocolatier. We're gonna do tasting some wonderful chocolate that comes from the area. Not to mention the cuisine that comes from there as well. One of our days in Rhin, we're going to travel out to Vérazé and visit a lighthouse of all things. And so you would say, why is there a lighthouse out in Verzenay? This is actually part of the Museum of Champagne that is housed up on a hill. You get a sort of a sense of it there. They restored this lighthouse not that long ago, when you can get amazing views over the vineyards that comprise Champagne. At the same time, in the same day, you can't visit Champagne without going to Moët Chandon and learning a little bit about Dom Pérignon. And as many of you may know, Dom Pérignon, he's credited with founding Champagne. He's actually not the guy that actually came up with the Champagne method, but he was a Benedictine monk who, in the latter part of the 19th century, frankly, he was a marketing guru, I think is how I would put it, if you can call it that, in that era. But his the champagnes with his label on them became amongst the world's most prized champagnes, and have consistently achieved the highest prices at auction. As I say, you can't go to Champagne without paying Dom Pérignon and Moët Chandon a visit. So that's part of what's in store for us on our trip. Again, 4 nights in Rhin at a wonderful 4-star hotel, and that will wrap up our trip of Burgundy and Champagne on October the 19th. On the 20th day of our trip is when we'll hop on the TGV once again from Rennes back to Paris and fly home. Or, of course, for those of you who like to continue on, the way that we've set this up is you could just as easily go in the opposite direction, go from Rennes over to Alsace to Strasbourg, or you could go to Geneva. There's so many other things that one could do, but we'll arrange for you your onward travel, or help you to arrange your onward travel from there. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of what some of the details of this program. As I mentioned, we've split it into 3 parts. So that you can choose to do 1, 2, or all 3 parts of the program, depending on your timing. The river cruise portion on the Amadeus Provence is available starting at 4,280 Canadian dollars. Everything, of course, we do is in Canadian dollars, based on a hide deck cabin, double occupancy. And we actually have a handful of cabins where that you can travel on in single, where the price is actually the single supplement, as you can see here, is quite reasonable. There's not too many of those cabins available, but for those of you who like to have their own space, that's quite a good deal. The second part of our trip, the gastronomic adventure in Lyon, is 1,250 Canadian dollars double. And so keeping in mind that included in that is our gourmet Michelin star multi-course meal. So that in and of itself, as you can imagine, is worth a couple of $100. But I think it's a very, very important thing to experience when you are visiting in Lyon and France. And then the latter part, our final 8 nights, we're just working out some of the details. That's why we don't have a final price for you. It's going to come in and around $2,800 to $2,900, double and roughly $400 more based on single occupancy. And all of this, I'll touch on some of the inclusions now. All of this, by the way, will be in our magazine that we are just putting the final touches on. As I say, there's a few details that I'm still working out because those of you that know me, I'd like to have things just perfect. And having been on the road for the last couple of weeks, I've been playing a little bit of catch up, but we'll have that out by next week. Let me explain about the airfare. So what we found recently with our programs is that a lot of people like to have flexibility on how they get to and from the trips. So we've put the airfare separately. We're obviously happy to make those arrangements for you, or we're happy to have you do them on your own. But just to give you a sense of what you're looking at, to go from sort of eastern part of Canada, Toronto, Montreal, in as example, over to Lyon and returning from Paris or from Lyon at the current time is in around the $1,000 to $1,200 range Canadian, including taxes. If you're coming from the West Coast, a couple $100 more than that. For those who are sensitive to airfare, I have seen online that you can go even less if you want to go with Air Transat. I don't recommend it, but they do have even lower airfares available. And not to mention, I say the fact that you might want to do Paris first and then start by coming down to Lyon. You may want to visit an entirely different part of Europe. No matter what your preference, we will make it happen for you. So covering off what's included on all of this, just to give you a sense, and of course the details will be in the brochure that comes out next week. Of course, we have all of our transfers and ground transportation for the included part of the program. For the free days, of course, if you want to go off and do your own thing, we'll facilitate that for you, but those would be extra. On board the ship, of course, all of our meals, our shore excursions, as I mentioned, there's 7 of them that are included, all of the port charges, taxes, service charges, all the tipping. We put everything in so you really don't have much to worry about it. Of course, if there is that extra shore excursion that you want to do, a few extra dollars, but otherwise it's pretty much an all-inclusive type arrangement while you're on the ship. Secondly, in Lyon, here we've certainly included a charming 4-star hotel. We've had guests stay in there before. And that comes with breakfast daily. We have a lunch included as well as part of our gastronomic tours. And of course, the multi-course gourmet dinner. So there'll be a few different tour options that we'll have for our stay in Lyon. And finally, for the third part, Burgundy and Champagne, once again, our transportation up to Dijon from Lyon, as well as from Dijon up to Reims, which will be by coach. 8 nights in really lovely 4-star hotels that we've selected. I generally avoid using chain hotels, as many of you will know. I like to go for the more locally owned classic style of hotels. We've got a couple lunches and dinners that are thrown into the program as well as a number of wine, champagne tastings, chocolate tasting. There's a number of exciting things that are included in the program, and then a TGV ticket that takes you from Reims back to Paris. But of course, if you want to go in the opposite direction, we can swap that out for you as well. So that gives you a sense. As far as exclusions is concerned, of course, travel insurance, which we highly recommend. Any other shore excursions that you want to do, and any of the meals or beverages that aren't included would be in addition to that, but there really isn't that much. Most of it is covered. So how you get more information about this, of course, is by dropping us a note. You're always welcome to email me or Cassandra, who can assist with anyone who's interested in booking the program. And now we can answer a few of the questions that have come in, or if you have thought of something that you'd like to know about this program, this is your opportunity to put your questions into the chat box, and I'll try to address a couple of them that have come in while I was presenting this webinar. From John, is it cold in October? No, actually, John, October is the best time to go. It's cooler, obviously, than September, but I think the temperatures are in and around Lyon average in the high teens and maybe low 20s. As you go further south, it's a little bit warmer, but it's harvest time. It's fall, perfect time for traveling. So it's October is it's not hot, but it's certainly not cold. So Lori asked, how much do we budget for extra meals in France? Good question. So as I mentioned, there are some meals that are not included because I just don't believe including all the meals along the way. First of all, it's far too much to eat. And second of all, part of the experience, particularly in France, is wandering and finding that little bistro and just experiencing or frankly eating at the markets, which is an experience in and of itself. If you go for a set lunch somewhere, you can typically expect to pay 20 to 30 euros, so $30 to $40 Canadian for lunch and dinner. It really depends. You can, as I say, have dinner at a food stall on the street for or you can go to one of these Michelin star restaurants. You can spend $300 for dinner, and kind of everything in between. But I find that most people generally budget, around $25, $30 for dinner and around $50, $60 for dinner. That's with 2 or 3 courses and a glass of wine. So for a few $100s, all of your extra meals would be covered on these programs. So Linda asks, can we extend our stay in France? Absolutely, Linda. The whole point of how these programs are set up is that it's a flexible arrival and departure. So by all means, you can continue on and stay in Paris for a few days. We can even recommend a hotel to you. And I do encourage, make use of the time while you're there. So no problem with that. Okay, let me see. One more question here. June says, I see a lot of meat in the pictures. Is the trip suitable for vegetarians? Yes, absolutely. So I didn't even think that I probably should have shown more vegetables in the presentation. France has wonderful vegetables. You definitely, whether it's on board the ship or at any part of the program, as long as we know any dietary considerations that you might have, be it if you are vegetarian or vegan, certainly accommodate that. Gluten-free. I've seen pretty much everything. We're well accustomed to that. And even in France, even though they do enjoy their meat and their fish over there, they're well accustomed to vegetarian. So we can definitely accommodate you. It's just nice to know in advance. I had the experience actually in Japan recently, where someone decided, because of the nature of the cuisine, there's a lot of meat and fish in the Japanese culture. And so partway through they said, it's, can I switch to vegetarian? And we were able to make that arrangement for the rest of the trip. So it's nice to know in advance. We can certainly accommodate it. Good. I think that is all the questions that I have on for now. But of course, if you do have any, or once you get the brochure, if you have any other questions, please drop me a note, drop Cassandra a note. We're happy to answer all the questions. I'd love to have you join us. This is going to be a terrific program. I was quite lucky to get enough space on the ship, as well as in these wonderful hotels. And we're going to have a great time. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I invite you to come out to our Taste of Eastern France in October of next year. And I look forward to connecting with you all soon. As you may know, I'm headed out on our next program to Croatia Croatia and the Adriatic coast, which starts in just a couple of days' time, and following which I will be back in Canada by early August, and look forward to meeting you at events in Eastern Canada as well as in Ontario. So until then, as always, I wish you happy travels, and thank you for participating in our webinar, Tastes of Eastern France.